reading this morning is by Emma Chaudron, The Root of Suffering, from her book, Comfortable with Uncertainty. What keeps us unhappy and stuck in a limited view of reality is our tendency to seek pleasure and avoid pain, to seek security and avoid groundlessness, to seek comfort and avoid discomfort. This is how we keep ourselves enclosed in a cocoon. Out there are the planets and all the galaxies of vast space, but we're stuck in this cocoon. Moment after moment, we're deciding that we'd rather stay in that cocoon than step out into that big space. Life in our cocoon is cozy and secure. We've gotten it all together. It's safe, it's predictable, it's convenient, and it's trustworthy. If we feel ill at ease, we just fill in those gaps. Our mind is always seeking zones of safety. We're in this zone of safety, and that's what we consider life, getting it all together, security. Death is losing that. We fear losing our illusion of security. That's what makes us anxious. We fear being confused, not knowing which way to turn. We want to know what's happening. The mind is always seeking zones of safety. And those zones of safety are continually falling apart. Then we scramble to get another zone of safety back together again. We spend all our energy and waste our lives trying to recreate those zones of safety, which are always falling apart. That's the essence of samsara, the cycle of suffering that comes from continually seeking happiness in all the wrong places. Hermann Hesse in The Glass Bead Game tells the story of Dasa, son of a Raja, to illustrate the meaning of Maya, the Hindu teaching of the transience of all the hopes, desires, and dreams that we experience in our lives. Dasa's mother died when he was very young, and after his father remarried, his stepmother schemed to displace him from the throne that was his of right in favor of her own son. Fearing for his safety, a certain Brahmin who loved him sent him off to live with some shepherds in the hills, and they raised the young prince. One day, while searching in the forest nearby for honey, he chanced upon the hut that belonged to a yogi who was sitting in deep meditation. He was very impressed by the sense of peace, of awe, and of love that surrounded the yogi. He went back to the herdsmen and they said, well, you should bring him a sacrifice, some food. That's how it is done in these parts. And so, for a time, Dasa did so every day. He would go to visit the yogi, sit in the silence, bring some food. And that he did until the herds were moved to new pastures. He grew up, started noticing women, saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, Parvati by name, won her hand in marriage, willingly took on all the tedious duties that went with being a son-in-law of a peasant family. And then one day Nala, the usurper, the younger son who sat on the throne that ought to have been Dasa's, came through hunting one day with his grand retinue and seduced Parvati, Dasa's wife. He carried him away. In his rage, Dasa picked up a slingshot, snuck into the tent in which the man was staying, and slew his rival. He had to go into hiding because he was certain that vengeance would soon follow. He ran all over the land through the forest, and he found himself once again at the hut of the yogi. He poured out his whole tale of woe, and the yogi listened calmly. And at the end of the story, he merely laughed and said, Maya, Maya. Dasa was very troubled by this easy dismissal of all the woes that he had suffered. He pondered it for many days, but finally he became restless and decided to move on. But he was wanted to know from the yogi first what he meant by dismissing all of this and calling it Maya. Maya. The yogi pointed to a gourd. He was a man of very few words, meaning that Dasa should take it and fill it up at the well. Dasa went to the well, and at the well, Parvati, his estranged wife, suddenly appeared before him. Boundless love once again took control of Dasa's soul as she hugged him and kissed him and told him that he was to be the new Raja. He dropped the gourd where they stood. He went with her to the palace. He came into great wealth and pleasure in his exalted capacity, and soon Parvati bore a beautiful son who became the center of all of Dasa's affection. But the evil stepmother had taken up residence in a kingdom next door and was urging the king of the Raja of that kingdom to send scouts, to send little war parties against the peasants who lived on the edges of the kingdom. This became worse and worse. And Dasa realized that he had to strike back because otherwise the opposing kingdom would take everything away from him. And so while he tried to resist war as best he could, everyone in his court, especially his wife Parvati, was pressing him on and on to go to war, to fight, to defend the region and our honor. It began to seem as though Parvati's affection were more and more focused towards the general of the army. Finally, Dasa struck the enemy with all his might, but he was foiled by a ruse, and he returned to his palace only to find that the city had been overrun with enemy soldiers, and that his precious son was dead in Parvati's laps. He himself was clapped into a dungeon with shackles on his hands and feet, when suddenly, in his utter despair, he found himself standing at the well with his gourd full of water. This, he realized, was how the yogi had taught him the meaning of the laugh, of the words, Maya, Maya. So, Dasa experienced all of the longings and fulfillments of desire, all of the sorrow of losing what he wanted and cared for, and he realized at last that all of this was just an illusion. He found peace at last and gladly entered into the discipline of learning from the yogi. And he never left the forest again. I am not commending the life of a Hindu yogi to you. But the story does illustrate the meaning of one of the central teachings of the Buddha, that our lives are fundamentally flawed by dukkha, often translated as suffering. And that suffering, the Buddha taught, is the result of our grasping on to things and people because we are driven by our desires. The Buddha himself found enlightenment in part as a result of the life he had lived, a childhood of privilege and pleasure at his father's palace, manhood with a beautiful wife and an infant son. All his life he'd been shielded from illness and age and death. But when he realized that none of this truly satisfied him, he left the palace and his family and sought and found enlightenment under the banyan tree, where he sat meditating and resisting temptation. The Buddha shared a great deal of wisdom with his followers, but here's a brief summary of the foundations of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth is that all of life is dukkha, usually translated as suffering, but also suggesting pain, unsatisfactoriness, angst, or anguish. The truth about our lives can be avoided for a time in the bubble of dasas or the Buddha's palace and the cocoon that Pema Chodron describes, but it can neither be escaped nor ignored. The second noble truth is that the cause of dukkha is our thirst, our clinging consciousness, our unrelenting desires. Because we try to cling to what is passing as though it were permanent, we're constantly being disappointed and frustrated, most of all because our own lives will also end. And the most violent clinging of all is to life itself. The third noble truth is the good news that salvation is possible from this state of suffering if we recognize that it is our clinging self, our ego, which is insubstantial and will one day end, and that we are in fact an integral part of all that is, that we're completely interdependent, that we inter-are. And then the fourth noble truth lays out the vehicle of enlightenment and its realization of suffering, its cause, and its cessation. This vehicle of salvation is the Noble Eightfold Path, which consists of right view, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and meditation. These 8 describe categories of morality, wisdom, and meditation. The Buddha's path sets forth clear ways of life that have very explicit moral standards, many of which are familiar to us from other sources. When Jesus says, for example, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the Buddha says, consider others as yourself. Where Jesus says, if anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. The Buddha says, if anyone should give you a blow with his hand, with a stick, or with a knife, you should abandon any desires and utter no evil words. If we are completely interdependent, as the Buddha taught, if we inter-are, if we affirm and promote, as our Seventh Unitarian Universalist principle puts it, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, then clearly we have to consider each of our actions in light of its impact on all of those beings and things on which we interdepend, ranging from our best friends to our worst enemies, from the air we breathe and the water we drink, even onto the earth itself. The heart of Buddhism, though, is practice, the experience of having a different relation to ourselves and the things around us, of actually abstracting ourselves for a time from suffering. And when we meditate, we're cultivating a different mode of experiencing our lives, of experiencing ourselves. We develop the ability to witness ourselves without being all bound up in our egos and our desires. The simplest forms of meditation involve nothing more than breathing in, breathing out. 1 as I breathe in, 2 as I breathe out, 3, 4, to 10, and then starting over. Inevitably, the monkey mind will assert its power over us and become a grave distraction, a great pain in our meditation. But in fact, the monkey mind is always at work, every second of our lives, distracting us from the here and now, pulling us away from what we have toward what we want, from what we are right now, where we are, to where we're going to be, from what we're enjoying now to what we fear later. Practice of meditation enables us to tame that wildness within us, to calm ourselves, so that we can be present right now, enjoying and giving thanks for what is without trying to make it last forever, or rush on to the next thing. We can welcome both joy and sorrow, both satisfaction and suffering. Perhaps this state of acceptance of what is and this determination to breathe out love regardless of what may befall is part of what Jesus meant by the kingdom of heaven that he spoke about, which is, he said, both to come and already present in the midst of those whom he taught. In one of his parables, he spoke of it this way. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a man, a merchant, seeking fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all he had and bought that one. Now, there have been endless interpretations of this parable rendered over the centuries. I happen to be reading it with a group of interfaith colleagues in a new tradition by a leading Jewish scholar of the New Testament. And what struck me about it as we were talking about it is that pearls come into being as a result of a grain of sand, an irritant to the oyster, a bit of suffering, dukkha, if you will, for the oyster, that ultimately results in a thing of great beauty, replacing and covering over the irritant, the sorrow. And so it often is with our own lives. It's precisely from hardship and sorrow and suffering that we often discover our real strength. And the overcoming of adversity is not infrequently among the highlights of our own lives. The Sufi poet Rumi from the Islamic tradition tells us to welcome whatever comes into our lives. He says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of all its furniture still. Treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Welcome, Rumi says, and entertain whatever comes. Find a place of quietness, a place of peace, removed from the passions of the day, and hold your mind with that, remembering that ultimately all is Maya. We could practice a little right here. When I breathe in, I breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. Sarah Dan Jones wrote that hymn in our Teal hymnal immediately after 9/11. When she found there was nothing she could say, nothing she could do in the wake of the horror of that day. Breathe in peace, breathe out love. Just breathing in and out, nothing more. Just finding a way to live through even the most horrible things that life throws at us. Breathing in, breathing out. The prayer that I spoke this morning is based on the Metta Sutta from the Pali, the record of the teachings of the Buddha as handed down by his disciples. Metta means loving kindness. And the prayer invites us to experience loving kindness for ourselves, and then to spread it to those around us, and then to all beings. This way, we move beyond the preoccupation with ourselves, storm-tossed as we not infrequently feel. We come to experience ourselves as being part of the whole, at one with all beings. You could help me out this time. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. You know, there are parts to this, and the choir knows them. And so choir members, you can take different parts of this one. And for those of you who can't carry a tune and never sing and just move your lips because you're embarrassed about it, there's a drone. Very simple. One note. Breathe in. Breathe out. So let's share that together. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out, I'll breathe out love. When I breathe in, let's begin this preface. I'll breathe in peace. When I breathe out,